I want you to just imagine for a second that you could print out a document, right? And this document contains every single unspoken thought, every hidden resentment, and, every secret fear you've ever had in your entire life.
That sounds like a terrifying document, honestly.
Right, it really does. But now, imagine that this printout isn't just a stack of paper sitting on your desk. Imagine that this printout is literally your physical body, like your bone, your muscle, your flesh. What if your anatomy is quite literally a ledger of your internal emotional life?
Yeah, that completely flips the traditional script of how we view health, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Because we are so conditioned by modern medicine to just look at the body as machine.
exactly like a car or something.
Right, exactly like a car. If there is a pain in your knee or some kind of chronic stomach issue, we just immediately assume a mechanical failure, like a gear wore out or a pipe is leaking. We rarely pause to ask if that chronic pain is actually a crystallized physical manifestation of, say, unexpressed anger.
Which is just such a wild concept to wrap your head around, but that is exactly the mission for this deep dive today. We are going to explore the hidden, profound, and sometimes, frankly, terrifying links between emotional toxicity and physical disease.
It's a fascinating area to dig into.
It really is. And to do this, we are looking at a stack of sources centered around a woman who was writing way back in the 1920s. Her name was Florence Scovel Shinn, and we're specifically looking at her book, Your Word is Your Wand. From the notes and all the modern analysis we have in front of us, she was essentially a metaphysician who was decoding the subconscious mind decades before modern neuroscience even caught up.
She really was. I mean, she was operating in this fascinating era of what they called New Thought, right?
Yeah.
Looking beyond the physical realm into the laws of energy and vibration.
Yeah.
So what we are going to do today is take her century-old metaphysical concepts, these ideas about words being magic wands and thoughts shaping reality, and we're going to put them right under the microscope of modern psychosomatic science.
I love that. Bridging the gap.
Exactly. We are going to contrast these two frameworks, the metaphysical and the medical, to reveal some incredibly practical steps for actually healing the mind-body connection.
So for you, the listener, here is the journey we are taking together over the next hour or so. We are going to unpack the literal biological mechanics of how repressed anger destroys physical cells. We are going to look at the crucial difference between passive hoping and active faith and why that distinction literally dictates your reality.
And we're also going to explore why radical forgiveness might actually be the ultimate medical intervention.
Yes. But before we get to the physical body breaking down, we have to start at the control center, right? We need to understand how words actually program the mind in the first place.
Right. Because Shinn's central thesis in Your Word is Your Wand is that words are not just, invisible vibrations of sound that echo for a second and then disappear into the void.
They aren't just empty air.
No, not at all. She argued that words are solid. They are raw materials, the things we say, and more importantly, our inner monologue. The things we tell ourselves silently all day long, they actively create our belief systems, and consequently, they create our physical reality.
It makes me think of like writing code for a computer program. We are constantly typing up the code for our own operating system, but most of us aren't even looking at the keyboard. We're just kind of mashing buttons in the dark.
That's a perfect analogy. We're just mashing buttons and hoping the software runs smoothly.
Exactly. Now, Shinn uses the metaphor of a magic wand, but let's ground this for a second, because I know there has to be a biological mechanism here, not just, Harry Potter magic. What is actually happening in the brain when we repeat these words or hold on to these thoughts?
Well, if we pull back the metaphysical curtain and just look at modern neuroscience for a second, we find a very specific structure in the brainstem. It's called the reticular activating system, or the RAS.
Yeah, RAS, okay.
Yeah. And to understand why words matter, you really have to understand what the RAS does. Right now, at this exact second, your brain is being bombarded with literally billions of bits of sensory data.
Like what?
Well, like the temperature of the room you're in, the feeling of your clothes against your skin, the hum of the refrigerator in the background, the light coming through the window, the traffic outside.
Oh, wow. Yeah, if my conscious brain tried to process all of that simultaneously, it would completely crash. Like, I'd go mad.
Exactly, the biological problem.
Yeah.
So evolution gave us the RAS to act as a kind of bouncer at the door of your conscious mind.
The bouncer. I like that.
Right. So the RAS filters out the vast majority of that useless sensory information and only lets through what it deems important. It evolved to keep us alive, essentially. It's designed to make you notice the tiger moving in the brush, but completely ignore the wind rustling the leaves.
Okay, that makes sense for cavemen. But in the modern world, where we aren't constantly running from predators, what actually determines the VIP list of what gets past the bouncer?
Let me guess. You already know the answer.
I mean, we do, right? Through the words we speak and the beliefs we hold.
Exactly. The RAS programs itself based entirely on what you focus on. If your internal monologue is constantly speaking from a place of lack, like if you are always saying, I never get a break, or opportunities never come my way, or people always take advantage of me.
Right. Which so many people do without even realizing it.
They do. And your RAS accepts that as the absolute rule of your reality. It will then literally filter out opportunities, supportive people, or positive outcomes that are right in front of your face.
Just because they don't match the code you typed in.
Exactly. They do not align with the software program you've installed, so you physically will not see them. The bouncer turns them away at the door.
Okay, this is really clicking for me. It's like a subconscious internal GPS navigation system.
A GPS, yes, perfect.
Like if I get in my car and just yell at the dashboard, I don't want to be here anymore. I hate this town. The GPS has absolutely no idea what to do with that information. It can't route me away from a negative. I have to input the exact specific destination I want to go to.
That is a brilliant way to look at it. The subconscious mind does not process negatives well. It needs a target.
But let me pause here and just push back on this on behalf of anyone listening who might be a bit skeptical, because this can sound dangerously close to just like magical thinking, the secret kind of stuff. Standing in front of a mirror and saying, I am a millionaire, doesn't suddenly put money in my bank account. So how do we actually cross the bridge from just reciting empty words to legitimately reprogramming the RAS?
That pushback is essential, and I'm glad you brought it up. Because reciting empty words does absolutely nothing. Zero.
Yeah.
The subconscious mind is incredibly stubborn. It doesn't just accept a new command because you said it out loud a few times in front of your bathroom mirror.
Right, that's not that gullible.
No, it requires immense conviction. And crucially, it requires imagery that leaves zero room for doubt. There is actually a really great story in Shinn's work that beautifully illustrates the psychology of this. It involves a man who is desperate to find his right work.
Right, I remember this one. He was unemployed, really struggling, and he goes to Shinn for a metaphysical consultation.
He does. He is looking for an affirmation, a way to program his mind for success. So Shinn gives him a phrase to repeat. She tells him to say, "Behold, I have set before thee an open door of destiny, and no man shall shut it."
Which, I mean, is very grand, very poetic. It sounds like something that should work.
But it didn't.
Really?
Yeah, it didn't work at all. The man came back to her and reported that the phrase just didn't give him any current. That was his specific word for it. It didn't spark any feeling inside of him. His subconscious wasn't buying the imagery.
Why not? It's a nice image.
Because deep down, there was still a sliver of doubt. There was a back door he was leaving open for the possibility of failure. Think about it. An open door can always be closed, right?
Oh, right. A draft could blow it shut.
Exactly. So Shinn modified the affirmation. She added just a few words at the very end to completely change the psychological weight of the imagery. She told him to say, "And no man shall shut it, for it is nailed back."
Wow. For it is nailed back. Just hearing you say that, it completely changes the visceral feeling of the sentence.
Doesn't it? Think about the psychology of that specific imagery. If a heavy wooden door is simply open, a strong gust of wind could blow it shut. A passing person could just casually push it closed. Your anxious, doubtful mind knows this. It anticipates it.
But if you visualize taking massive heavy iron nails and physically hammering that door into the wall behind it.
It cannot be closed.
Yeah.
The fallback option is entirely eliminated.
It completely short-circuits the subconscious doubt. You are giving your internal GPS a command that is so robust, with imagery so vivid, that your anxiety can't even argue with it. You've removed the escape hatch.
Exactly. And according to the source material, once he started using that specific phrase, he was electrified by it. His RAS shifted, his behavior changed, his confidence skyrocketed, and he very shortly landed a fantastic job in a distant city.
So it wasn't that the words themselves were a literal magic spell, it was that he finally eliminated his own mental fallback option.
Yes. When your subconscious has zero fallback options, it funnels all of his processing power, all of his filtering capability, into making that single destination a reality. It literally stops looking for reasons why you might fail and starts hyper-focusing on the pathways to success.
Okay, so if positive, specific, deeply felt words can program our internal GPS for success, we have to look at the terrifying inverse of this.
Oh, yes. the dark side of the GPS.
Right. What happens when our internal GPS is locked onto a negative destination? What happens when we are constantly feeding it resentment, fear, and unspoken anger? This brings us to the core of the mind-body connection in these sources, and we're going to transition now from how thoughts shape external circumstances to how they actively dismantle our internal biology.
This is where we look at the toxic transformation of repressed anger into physical illness. And the sources provide a very detailed case study from Shinn's practice that bridges this gap between a metaphysical diagnosis and a very modern medical reality. It involves a widow and a very sudden, severe case of gallstones.
Set the stage for this one, because the mechanics of how this plays out are just fascinating.
Okay, so the case study describes a woman who is perfectly healthy and generally very happy. Tragically, her husband passes away. Now, that is a trauma in itself, obviously, but the situation is severely compounded when she discovers that he left a significant portion of his estate to another relative rather than to her.
Oh, wow. Which instantly triggers an all-consuming emotional response, right? She doesn't just feel sad, she feels a profound, burning sense of injustice.
Absolutely. She becomes entirely consumed by anger, deep resentment, and bitterness toward this specific relative. And she doesn't just feel this anger once and process it or talk it out. She stews in it. She ruminates constantly. It becomes her dominant internal monologue from the moment she wakes up to the moment she goes to sleep.
So her RAS is now entirely locked onto this injustice. It's the only thing she sees.
Precisely. And then the physical manifestation hits. She starts losing weight rapidly. Her health deteriorates. And she develops incredibly painful gallstones out of nowhere.
Just from the anger.
Well, Shinn, acting in her capacity as a 1920s metaphysician, diagnoses this ailment in a very specific way. She tells the woman that these physical stones are not some random biological glitch. She says they are the literal physical manifestation of her hard, bitter thoughts.
Hard, bitter thoughts. It sounds very poetic, but let's translate that. If we take that metaphysical phrase and translate it into modern psychosomatic reality, does the mapping actually hold up?
It's almost perfect, actually. It explains exactly how emotional toxicity transforms into internal physical damage. Let's break down the biology here. When a person harbors intense, constant anger and resentment, their brain perceives a severe threat.
Even though the threat isn't physical.
Right, because the primitive part of the brain, the amygdala, doesn't distinguish between a physical predator trying to eat you and an emotional injustice threatening your livelihood. A threat is a threat. So it triggers the fight or flight response.
The sympathetic nervous system kicks into overdrive. We're talking about a massive chemical cascade here, aren't we?
A massive one. The body is suddenly flooded with stress hormones, primarily cortisol and adrenaline. Now let's look at what the body does when it's in a fight or flight state. Its only priority is immediate short-term survival, period.
Right.
So it pumps blood and oxygen to the major muscle groups and the heart so you can physically run away or fight the danger. But to do that, to have that energy, it has to divert resources away from non-essential long-term functions.
Because if you are actively being chased by a tiger, you don't need to be prioritizing your immune system or, digesting your lunch.
Exactly. The digestive system effectively goes offline. It slows to a crawl. Blood flow to the gut is restricted. Now, let's look at the gallbladder specifically.
Okay.
The gallbladder is a small organ that stores bile, which is produced by the liver, right? And it releases this bile into the digestive tract to help break down fats. But if the digestive system is shut down due to chronic, unrelenting stress...
It doesn't go anywhere.
Exactly. That bile isn't being used properly. It just sits there. It stagnates. And under the chemical pressure of chronic cortisol and a sluggish digestive tract, that stagnant fluid literally begins to crystallize. It forms physical hard stones.
That is just wild. The metaphysical concept of hard, bitter thoughts perfectly predicted the physiological reality of chronic stress disrupting the biliary system.
It really did. It's a direct mechanical link between an unhealed emotion and a chronic physical illness.
And it's absolutely mind-blowing when you trace that causal chain. Because think about it. The anger didn't do a single thing to punish the relative who got the money.
Not a thing.
That relative was probably living their life completely fine, totally oblivious to the widow's rage. The anger toxified the widow's own blood. It's like that old, incredibly accurate analogy. Harboring resentment is like drinking poison yourself and expecting the other person to die.
Yes.
You are the one ingesting the toxicity. Your cells are the ones taking the hit.
It forces us to confront a very difficult truth about our emotions, honestly. Because when we hold on to unresolved resentment, we almost always feel justified. We feel we are morally right to be angry because we were wronged. But our biology does not care about our moral justification.
Biology doesn't do ethics.
Exactly. The hidden link between unresolved resentment and physical disease is purely mechanical. It is a chemical cascade that results in tangible, measurable tissue damage every single time.
So, if acute explosive anger locks up the digestive system and forms literal stones, what happens when the toxic energy isn't explosive, but more of a slow, constant, simmering negativity? You know, the kind of daily criticism you just carry around with you everywhere. Because Shinn's work actually maps out an entire topography of emotional illness, linking specific emotional traumas to specific physical organs. Let's take a tour of the body, starting with the joints.
Okay, let's do it.
Conditions like rheumatism, arthritis, gout. Shinn connects these to what she calls acid thoughts.
This is another instance where the 1920s intuition just aligns beautifully with modern medical understanding. Metaphysically, she says that constant criticism, fault-finding, and holding deep grudges create a metaphorical acid in the mind. The person becomes rigid in their thinking. Their mind hardens in its judgments of others.
And in sympathetic response, the physical joints harden.
Yes, they harden, they become inflamed, and they lose their flexibility.
But how does that actually play out on a cellular level? Because I know people who are incredibly critical and they always seem to have chronic joint pain, but I always thought it was just a coincidence.
It's not a coincidence. Scientifically, we look at inflammation, chronic stress, and persistent negative emotions, especially the hypervigilance required to constantly find fault in your environment. Keep the body in a state of chronic, low-grade inflammation.
Like your immune system is always just humming in the background.
Right, and when the brain perceives this constant stress, the liver produces something called C-reactive protein, or CRP.
Which is like a distress flare being sent up in the bloodstream.
Precisely.
Yeah.
CRP is a major marker of systemic inflammation. When these inflammatory markers circulate chronically through your blood, they often target the joints. The synovial fluid that lubricates the joints becomes compromised. The body essentially becomes more acidic in a metabolic sense. So the acid thoughts literally create an inflammatory, acidic environment in the tissues. The mind hardens its stance, and the joints physically lose their range of motion.
It is the body acting out a physical charade of the mental state.
It's a literal translation. The body is a mirror.
Okay, what about things that are more structural, like tumors or cysts? Because in the sources, Shinn refers to these as false growths.
She attributes false growths to deep-seated jealousy, hatred, and old, buried anger that a person has allowed to fester for years, sometimes even decades, without expressing or processing it.
I think of the subconscious mind as a garden, right? If you plant seeds of jealousy, resentment, and hatred, you aren't going to grow roses. You are going to cultivate toxic weeds. And if you let those weeds grow unchecked in the dark, hidden corners of your mind, eventually they require physical space.
Yeah, that is a very apt way to visualize it. When you harbor a toxic emotional mass that you refuse to process, the body literally doesn't know what to do with that trapped energy. The body's natural defense mechanism against toxicity is to wall it off.
To quarantine it.
Exactly. So it responds to this buried emotional mass by encapsulating it. It literally grows a physical structure, a cyst, a benign tumor, a false growth, to contain the manifestation of that suppressed energy. It is the physical body's desperate attempt to quarantine the toxicity, just as the mind has tried to quarantine the painful emotion.
That is a heavy realization, just knowing your body is trying to protect you from your own thoughts. Moving through the physical map, let's look at the cardiovascular system. Heart disease. Shinn links heart issues to fear and panic.
Well, the heart has a natural rhythmic flow, symbolically and literally. It represents the flow of life and vitality. Chronic fear, anxiety, and the constant anticipation of disaster disrupt that rhythm.
It literally skips beats.
It does. Psychosomatic medicine confirms this endlessly. Chronic anxiety leads to hypertension, arrhythmias, and immense cardiovascular strain. When you live in constant fear, you are quite literally gripping the engine of your life too tightly, forcing it to work against immense pressure until it gives out.
And it doesn't just stop at the internal organs, it extends to our senses. The sources highlight Shinn's view on eyesight and hearing, which I found so strange at first. She claims blurry vision or failing eyesight is often linked to a fear of the future.
The logic here is actually fascinating once you unpack it. If the mind is terrified of what is coming next, if it anticipates only pain, failure, or loss in the future, the subconscious decides that it is simply safer not to look.
So it sabotages the hardware.
Basically, yes. The physical eyes respond to this subconscious command by refusing to see clearly. The muscles that focus the lens remain tense and unyielding. It is a protective mechanism gone awry. This is why Shinn would give clients with vision issues the affirmation: "There are no lions in my path, only angels."
There are no lions in my path.
I love that. It's a way of forcefully telling the RAS that the future is safe to look at, so the physical eyes can relax their defensive posture. And she applies a similar logic to the ears, right? She links deafness to stubbornness. She does. When a person's personal will becomes so rigid that they outright refuse to hear the truth of a situation, or when they refuse to listen to the perspectives of others, or even ignore their own inner intuition, they are energetically shutting down their receivers.
Like putting your fingers in your ears, but mentally.
Exactly. And the body eventually says, well, since we were actively ignoring the input anyway, let's just shut down the physical hardware to save energy. The ears align with the mental reality and close off.
It really makes you evaluate every single ache, pain, and physical limitation in a completely different light.
Now, the last point on this topographical map of illness that really stood out to me in the sources was her view on anemia. Because we usually think of anemia as a simple mechanical failure. Low iron, take a supplement, eat some spinach, you're fine. But Shinn views anemia not just as a blood deficiency, but as soul starvation.
It is a poetic description, for sure, but it points to a very real physiological state: metabolic depression. She posits that a lack of joy, a life devoid of passion, and carrying deeply unfulfilled desires literally depletes the body's life force. How so?
Well, the blood carries oxygen and nutrients. It is the physical medium of vitality in the body. If a person feels no joy, no spark, no excitement for their existence, the body's subconscious instruction is to just dial down the production of that vitality. Why produce abundant energy if the user doesn't want to live actively? The soul is starved for joy, and the physical blood becomes thin and weak in response.
Okay, so we have mapped out the damage. We see the terrifying compounding physical cost of emotional toxicity. The billion-dollar question for anyone listening right now is, how do we stop it? How do we reverse engineer this mind-body connection to actually heal? According to the metaphysical framework in these sources, the answer isn't a new pill and it isn't a surgery. The ultimate medical intervention is radical forgiveness.
To understand why forgiveness is a physical health imperative, we have to look at how individuals can reprogram their subconscious mind to release trapped stress. Shinn frames this by contrasting the law of karma with the state of being under grace.
Okay, break that down for us.
Karma, in this context, is simply the inescapable law of cause and effect. You hold a grudge, you produce cortisol, you get sick. It is a closed mechanical loop of suffering. But she argues that forgiveness is the specific active tool that pulls a person out of that karmic loop and puts them under grace, where the physical laws of cause and effect are sort of suspended.
Let's ground this massive concept in one of the most surprising stories from the source material. It's the story of the $1,000 debt.
Oh, this is a perfect example. It perfectly illustrates the mechanics of radical forgiveness. So there was a woman who was in desperate need of money to survive, and someone owed her $1,000, which was a massive sum at the time.
Life-changing money back then.
Absolutely. But the money was trapped. The debtor just wouldn't pay her. So she goes to Shinn for advice, likely expecting, a metaphysical trick to force the man's hand, or advice on how to aggressively collect the debt.
Right, like an affirmation to make him pay up.
Exactly. Instead, Shinn tells her something completely counterintuitive. She advises the woman to radically forgive the debtor, to release him entirely from the obligation in her own mind.
Now, I have to pause here and really push back on this because I know exactly what someone listening is thinking right now. Isn't forgiving someone who stole from you or owes you money just letting them get away with it? I mean, if I am broke and I need my money to pay rent, how does sitting in my room saying, "I forgive you," put cash in my hand? It sounds like playing the victim and just giving up entirely.
It absolutely sounds like giving up if you view forgiveness as a transactional favor between two people. If you think forgiveness is something you do for the other person, it definitely feels like losing. But Shinn is proposing that forgiveness is an internal, energetic intervention for yourself.
Okay, I think I see where you're going with this. Think of a tangled knot in a thick rope. If you want to untangle it, what happens if you grab both ends and pull aggressively in anger?
The knot just gets tighter. It
Right.
locks up completely. And that is what this woman was doing with her anger. Applying pressure, fury, and constant demands only tightened the energetic and psychological knot between her and the money. Her entire mental state, her RAS, was focused exclusively on lack.
She was vibrating at the frequency of being broke.
Exactly. She didn't have the money, she was a victim of this man, and she was entirely dependent on him to save her. That state of dependency and rage is a massive internal blockage.
So forgiveness is the act of dropping your end of the rope. It loosens the knot so things can actually flow.
Precisely. By forgiving the debtor, she wasn't doing him a favor, and she wasn't saying his actions were legally or morally correct. She was releasing her own mental state of lack. She stopped vibrating at the frequency of desperation and victimhood. She cleared her own internal blockage by untethering her emotional well-being from his choices.
Then what happened?
The source notes that once she achieved that true, profound internal release, the $1,000 arrived from a completely unexpected source within a month.
Because she changed her internal GPS destination from "I am owed and lacking" to "I am free and open." Forgiveness is not a gift you give to the wrongdoer. It is the method for clearing your own internal toxic blockages.
Right.
When you genuinely let go of the anger, the cortisol stops flowing, the fight-or-flight system powers down, the parasympathetic nervous system engages, digestion restarts, the inflammation cools. You are quite literally saving your own life by forgiving the person who wronged you.
This is the absolute crux of the subconscious reprogramming logic behind physical healing. You cannot heal a physical body that is constantly being told by the subconscious mind that it is under attack from past grievances. Radical forgiveness is the only way to signal to your cells that the war is over.
So, if forgiveness is how we pull the toxic weeds out of the garden and stop the cellular damage, how do we start planting the seeds of holistic wellness? How do we protect our minds and our relationships from future anxiety so the weeds don't just grow right back the next day?
Well, this takes us to a broader concept Shinn introduces, which she calls the body electric. It requires a huge paradigm shift in how we view ourselves. She suggests we must stop seeing the human form as just a fragile meat suit that is subject to inevitable fatigue, decay, and disease.
Which is how most of us view aging, right?
Exactly. But if we reprogram the mind to see the body as an energetic system, a conduit of boundless, renewing energy, we can actually refuse to accept chronic fatigue as our default state. We change the blueprint the cells are following.
It's about shifting those deep mental states to promote physical wellness. And crucially, this doesn't just apply to our individual bodies. It applies directly to our relationships, which, let's be honest, are often the biggest source of our emotional toxicity and stress in the first place.
Oh, absolutely.
The sources dive into a concept Shinn calls the shared thought world in marriages and partnerships.
This is a vital area to explore because we often think we are protecting our relationships when our internal programming is actually destroying them from the inside out. The source material uses a brilliant analogy to explain fear in a relationship. The glass of water.
Walk us through that one.
Imagine you are holding a very delicate, incredibly valuable crystal glass of water. Because you value it so much, you are terrified of dropping it. So you grip it tighter and tighter.
Until eventually, the immense pressure of your own protective grip shatters the glass right in your hand. The very fear of losing it is the exact mechanism that causes the destruction.
Exactly. And the sources point out that in relationships, particularly regarding the fear of infidelity or the other woman or external interference, this fear is entirely self-sabotaging.
She explains it through the metaphysical concept of duality versus oneness.
Right, she does. If you believe there is a third force out there that can step in and ruin your relationship, you are feeding your subconscious a narrative of vulnerability, division, and constant threat. Because of your RAS, your brain starts hyperfixating on evidence of this interference.
You start checking their phone, analyzing their tone of voice.
You become suspicious, controlling, suffocating, and constantly anxious. You become the tight grip on the delicate glass.
And that suffocating, paranoid atmosphere is exactly what drives the partner away. The fear manifests the reality. To fix this, Shinn says relationships must be built on the bedrock of oneness. You and your partner have to actively create a compatible, shared thought world.
The sources share a very telling story to illustrate this, referred to as the Fifth Avenue versus 10-cent store mindset.
I found this one really interesting.
Yeah, it details a married couple who were slowly but surely drifting apart. It wasn't because they didn't love each other or because there was a third party involved. It was because they were vibrating at entirely different frequencies in their daily lives.
That's so.
Well, the husband was thinking abundantly. He was visualizing success, growth, and opportunity, which the story represents metaphorically as the high-end Fifth Avenue mindset. The wife, however, was trapped in a poverty consciousness, a mentality of constant lack, fear of ruin, and extreme limitation represented by the 10-cent store.
And it's important to clarify here, for the listener, this isn't a story about one person wanting expensive designer clothes and the other wanting to save money for retirement. It's a metaphor for how two people view the architecture of the universe itself.
Yes, exactly.
One sees a universe of endless opportunity and support, and the other sees a universe of extreme scarcity, threat, and impending doom.
And when two people live in the exact same house, but occupy entirely different mental universes, profound emotional friction is inevitable. They can't communicate effectively because they are translating every single event through completely different RAS filters.
Right. A new job offer is an exciting adventure to one and a terrifying risk of failure to the other.
Yes, exactly. To avoid the specific brand of relationship toxicity, both partners must actively work to align their frequencies. They must deliberately cultivate a shared thought world of abundance and mutual trust. If they don't, the internal energetic friction will eventually manifest as a physical external separation.
And part of maintaining that shared thought world, and honestly our own individual mental health, is knowing what mental files to hold on to and what to permanently delete. The source brings up Shinn's advice on memory, which I found fascinating because it goes against everything we are traditionally taught.
Right, we always prize a great photographic memory.
We do, but she suggests something entirely different. When I read it, I immediately thought of it like clearing a smartphone's cache.
That is a highly accurate modern analogy for what she was teaching. We assume that a great mind remembers everything, but in reality, remembering every single past hurt, every slight, every failure, and every embarrassing moment is incredibly draining. It consumes your mental processing power, your psychological RAM, so to speak.
Think about your phone. If you have 100 background apps, running apps you haven't actually looked at in 3 years, the battery drains in an hour, the phone gets physically hot, and the whole system becomes sluggish and prone to crashing.
Right.
We do the exact same thing with our resentments and past traumas. We run them in the background constantly, draining our body electric. Shinn says we must practice deliberate amnesia for toxicity. You have to actively clear the cache to free up processing power for the present moment.
Which perfectly sets up the next major transition in our exploration. We've talked extensively about clearing out the toxicity, healing the physical cellular damage, and aligning our relationships. But clearing the negative is only half the battle, isn't it?
Right. Eventually you have to build something new.
Exactly. How do we actually move forward? How do we actively navigate difficult life transitions and manifest the tangible success we desire? According to the sources, the secret lies in understanding the massive fundamental difference between hope and faith.
Yes, active faith versus passive hoping. To most people in everyday conversation, these words are totally interchangeable. You say, I hope I get the promotion, or I have faith I'll get the promotion. It feels like the exact same sentiment. But according to Shinn's framework, and according to the programming language of the subconscious mind, they are worlds apart.
They represent entirely different operational states of the nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
Hope is, by its very definition, inherently passive. It looks to a timeline in the future. When you say, I hope this happens, grammatically and psychologically, you are simultaneously acknowledging the very real possibility that it might not happen.
Oh, that's so true.
Hope contains a hidden kernel of doubt. It places your desire out of reach, in a future that hasn't arrived yet.
It's like standing at a bus stop hoping the bus comes, but nervously looking at your watch every 10 seconds because you secretly think the schedule is wrong.
Exactly. Active faith, however, operates entirely in the present tense. It is the absolute, unshakable knowing that the desire is already fulfilled on a metaphysical level and is simply in the mechanical process of manifesting physically. Because of this certainty, active faith requires action. It demands that you behave in the physical world as if the outcome is already guaranteed.
The source material illustrates this beautifully with the concept of digging ditches.
This is a classic metaphysical parable. If a farming village is suffering from a massive drought and they all gather to pray for rain, praying isn't enough. If they truly have faith that the rain is coming, they have to prove it by going out into the dry, sun-baked fields and undertaking the grueling physical labor of digging the ditches to catch the water before a single cloud appears in the sky.
Wow.
If you aren't digging ditches, your subconscious knows you don't actually believe it's going to rain. You are just passively hoping.
And this translates to very practical modern life strategies in the sources.
It does. There's a story of a young woman who came to Shinn. She was building a hope chest for her future marriage, collecting linens and items, wistfully hoping she would one day find a husband. Shin told her to stop immediately and rename it a faith chest.
The psychological shift there is immense. A hope chest is wistful and slightly sad. A faith chest is active preparation. You are buying items for a reality that is certain. But my absolute favorite example of this active faith in the sources is the story of the empty room and the new lamp. Let's really look at the mechanics of this one because it's wild.
Okay, so this involves a woman who was in a really tight financial spot. She had a spare room in her house that she desperately needed to rent out for income, but it just sat empty week after week. She was hoping for a tenant. Shin told her she needed to show active faith to shift her reality. So what did the woman do? Even though she had very little money to her name, she went out and bought a brand new, beautiful, expensive lamp for that empty room.
Now, let's look at this from a purely logical accounting perspective. That is a terrible financial decision. You have zero income coming from the room, so you spend your dwindling cash on decor for a room nobody is using. A financial advisor would scream at you. But from a subconscious reprogramming perspective, it is an absolute masterstroke.
It is a masterstroke because it physically signaled to her subconscious mind, and in Shin's view, to the broader universe, that she was fully preparing for the tenant. She wasn't preparing for an empty room, she was preparing for an occupied room. Her physical action broke her mental state of lack. She dug the ditch.
She bought the lamp.
Yes. And as the story goes, the moment she aligned her physical actions with her active faith, the tenant appeared.
It's about demonstrating your internal GPS destination through physical action in the real world. But the sources attach a massive warning label to this process of manifesting and using active faith, and it has to do with the people around us. Shin warns fiercely about the necessity of protecting what she calls the unformed goal.
She uses a very practical analogy here. Jelly setting in a mold. When you have a new goal, a new leap of active faith you are taking, whether it's starting a business, writing a book, or changing careers, that belief is initially very fragile. It hasn't fully solidified in your subconscious yet. It's like warm liquid jelly.
Okay, I'm following.
If you start telling all your friends, family, and coworkers about it prematurely, what happens?
They poke the jelly. They say, are you sure you can afford that? Or isn't the market really terrible for that right now? Or what if you fail and lose everything? They project their own fears, their own limiting beliefs, and their own RAS filters onto your fragile, unformed goal.
And because your own internal belief is still setting, their doubts easily penetrate your subconscious. Their skepticism weakens your vibrational frequency. You start to internalize their fear. You doubt yourself. The jelly never sets, and the goal collapses before it ever had a chance to solidify.
So you sabotage yourself before you even start.
Exactly. This is why it is so critical when taking leaps of faith, to keep your intentions strictly private until they have materialized enough to withstand external scrutiny.
Yeah.
You have to fiercely protect the incubation process.
Okay, so we are actively digging ditches, we are buying lamps for empty rooms, and we are keeping our mouths shut while the jelly sets. But let's be real for a second. Taking these massive leaps of active faith sounds inherently risky. How do we ensure we aren't just acting out of impulsive recklessness? How do I know I am being guided by a true, deep wisdom and not just making a terrible emotional decision?
That is the ultimate test of emotional maturity in this framework. It requires us to cultivate the ability to distinguish between two internal voices that often sound very similar in the moment, but lead to entirely different destinations: intuition versus impulse.
This is a huge distinction to make because if I am sitting at my desk on a Tuesday and I suddenly get the overwhelming urge to quit my job, sell everything, and move to Bali, how do I know if that's my profound intuition guiding me to my highest destiny, or if I'm just having a panic response because I had a bad meeting with my boss? How do we tell the difference biologically?
The source material provides a very clear physiological guide to tell them apart, and it ties right back into our nervous system again. Impulse is always born from a state of pressure. It comes from fear, a sense of lack, or the anxiety of missing out, what we call FOMO.
Right.
When you are acting on impulse, your body feels it physically. Your heart rate elevates, your chest might feel tight, your breathing becomes shallow. There is a frantic, urgent, chaotic energy to it. You feel a desperate sense that if you don't act right this second, disaster will strike or you will lose out forever.
It's that fight or flight energy again. The sympathetic nervous system is driving the car, telling you to run.
Exactly. Impulse is an escape attempt. Intuition, on the other hand, operates on a completely different biological and energetic channel. True intuition, no matter how illogical, expensive, or frightening the guidance might seem on paper, always arrives with a profound sense of inner peace. There's a stillness to it.
It doesn't feel rushed.
No, it doesn't scream at you. It drops a quiet, undeniable knowing into your gut. Your parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest system, is engaged. You might be terrified of the action you have to take, but the knowing itself feels calm, centered, and rooted.
That is such a vital, practical distinction. Impulse feels like frantically running away from something terrible. Intuition feels like walking steadily towards something, even if the path ahead is entirely in the dark. And that brings us to the final story from our sources, which I think perfectly encapsulates this entire journey of training the mind and the body.
You were referring to the story of Magnolia Charlie.
I am. Walk us through who he was and why he is the perfect synthesis of everything we've discussed today.
Well, Magnolia Charlie was a local character in one of Shinn's anecdotes, who possessed a very specific, highly trained ability. No matter how bleak the landscape was, no matter how deep the mud, how gray the sky, or how cold the bitter end of winter was, he could always find the very first spring flower, the magnolia blooming amidst the dirt. He had an uncanny ability to spot life where everyone else only saw death and decay.
The crucial thing here is that he didn't ignore the mud. The mud was real. The difficulties of life, the cold, the dirt, they were all present. But his internal GPS, his reticular activating system, was so finely tuned, so relentlessly programmed to seek out life, opportunity, and beauty that he saw the bloom while everyone else only saw the swamp.
And that is what this entire deep dive in the core of these metaphysical teachings is truly about. Training your subconscious to spot the bloom of opportunity, even when you are surrounded by the mud of circumstance. It is the ultimate synthesis of emotional maturity, active faith, and subconscious reprogramming.
When we look back at the ground we've covered today, it is a massive paradigm shift. We started by looking at their reticular activating system and realizing that our internal monologue isn't just background noise. It literally dictates what we are physically capable of seeing in the world.
We then took a hard biological look at how unhealed repressed anger doesn't just hurt our feelings. It triggers a chemical cascade that creates literal gallstones, inflames our joints through C-reactive protein, and starves our blood of vitality. We proved that the mind and body are not separate entities, but one continuous, highly sensitive feedback loop.
We explored the true, selfish nature of radical forgiveness. We learned that it is not a favor to an enemy, but a necessary, urgent medical intervention to untangle our own energetic knots and stop the flow of toxic stress hormones. We learned why we must clear the cache of our memory to save our body electric, why we must upgrade from passive hoping to the ditch-digging reality of active faith, and how to tell the quiet, rooted truth of intuition from the frantic, fearful noise of impulse. You really are the architect of your reality, and your words, spoken and unspoken, are the blueprints.
The knowledge of how this works is available, the biological mechanisms are clear, and the choice of what to build with those blueprints is entirely in the hands of the listener.
Which brings us to the end of our deep dive. And as always, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final, slightly provocative thought to chew on long after this audio stops playing. We've spent the last hour talking about how the words we speak out loud shape our physical reality, how they dictate our cellular health, and how they open or close the doors of our destiny. But consider this. Neuroscientists estimate that the average human being has tens of thousands of thoughts every single day. The vast, overwhelming majority of those thoughts are completely silent. So if your spoken words are a magic wand, what kind of silent, invisible spell is your inner monologue casting on your physical body right at this very second when absolutely no one else is listening?